Hi, this is Helen, and I'm here to share some exciting news with you. During the month of November, the Heart of Hospice podcast is bringing you 4 special episodes featuring end-of-life educator Barbara Carnes. Barbara is going to be sharing stories about her hospice career that you've never heard before, talking about the lessons she learned along the way and her dreams for hospice in the future. She'll also be talking about her personal caregiving story and her grief journey following the death of her husband. Each episode will be published on Mondays during the month of November, which just happens to be National Hospice and Palliative Care Month and National Family Caregivers Month. You can hear the first episode on Monday, November 4th, so be sure to like and follow the podcast on your favorite podcast platform so you won't miss an episode. I want to thank my friends at the Death Deck for sponsoring this special series with Barbara Carnes. Be sure and check out their newest product, the End of Life Deck. With a casual tone and open-ended questions, the End of Life Deck makes starting conversations about what matters most a little easier. Visit thedeathdeck.com to learn more. Hi, I'm Helen Bauer, and this is the Heart of Hospice podcast. The Heart of Hospice podcast is your source for compassionate and informative discussions about hospice and end-of-life care. I'm a certified hospice and palliative care nurse with over 15 years of experience. Whether you're a caregiver, someone with a serious illness, or you simply need to know more about hospice care, this podcast is for you. Join me as we explore all the aspects of hospice, from the details of caregiving to the emotional and spiritual dimensions of end-of-life journeys. For more resources and to connect with me, visit theheartofhospice.com and find us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Keep listening for today's episode.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
This episode is sponsored by GrandPad. GrandPad is the all-in-one tablet designed especially for senior adults. With GrandPad, you get safe, simple video calling and photo sharing. Users can create a private family network that allows for secure photo and video sharing. The GrandPad utilizes a simple format that allows seniors to enjoy games, music, email, and more. Visit our special GrandPad website designed exclusively for the Heart of Hospice listeners at grandpad.net/THOH.
Award-winning producer, director, and writer Johanna Lunn has contributed to many compelling, entertaining, and profoundly thought-provoking programs during her 35 years in the business. She's received 8 Canadian Screen Award nominations and won 3. Johanna is using her lifelong curiosity about death and the dying process to bring you the documentaries about what happens when we die. She's the co-founder of the When You Die Project, which hosts a resource-rich website, podcast, and documentary Trilogy. You can find her work at whenyouDie.org. In our interview today, you're going to hear about the events in Johanna's life that occurred when she was fairly young that had a profound impact on her and influenced her desire to learn more about death and dying. The purpose of the trilogy of films from When You Die is to demystify death and to help people have open conversations about death and dying. Johanna's going to explain how the trilogy of films was created. And why she focused on the stories that people have about death and dying and how that experience has affected them. Johanna believes there's more to talk about, and she'd like to have a continuing conversation about grief and grieving and the impact of grief on all of us. So you can visit the website at whenyoudie.org, check the films out, and I hope you enjoy this conversation with documentary filmmaker Johanna Lunn. Johanna, it's so great to have you here with me. Welcome to the Heart of Hospice podcast.
Oh, thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Well, we're going to start with an icebreaker question. I'm a little obsessed with a game called the Death Deck. If you're,
Yes.
Yeah, you're familiar with it. That's awesome. Well, the Death Deck ladies have also designed an end of life deck, which is a little more reflective, a little more, let's say, practical, and not so tongue in cheek. And it's actually for some serious discussions about end of life wishes and advanced care planning. So I pulled one of these just so we could stay in theme with what we're talking about today. So here's your question, so we can get to know you a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually called Message from Beyond, which sounds a little interesting. If you could send one post-death message from beyond, what would you tell your family?
Oh, I know this is going to sound so corny, but I really do mean it. Just don't sweat the small stuff. Really, get out there in nature. Go have fun. Just go have fun. If it makes you grumpy, drop it. Forget it. Not worth it.
I like that. If it makes you grumpy, don't do it. That's good. I don't think that's corny at all. I think that's nice. Very nice. Okay. So, a filmmaker, a documentarian for 20 plus years, awards, accolades, a recognized expert in filmmaking. But your last 3 films, this trilogy that you've made, is focused on death. Why a focus on death?
Well, this is an area I've wanted to explore as a filmmaker for a long, long time. And it really goes back to my own youth, that when I turned 19, I lost my mother unexpectedly. And then right after that, I was in a major car accident where a pedestrian was hit and killed. And I ran out of the car and was there for his last breath. Then less than a year later, my very best friend growing up was also killed in a car accident. So less than 3 years, 3 major, major deaths. And I was going into college at the first one. And, that's a place where you should be social and hanging out and being with a lot of friends or making friends and lifelong connections and all that. And I was in such a deep, deep, deep grief state. I couldn't relate. I was in shock. I couldn't relate to anything that was going on. And people didn't know how to talk to me, not just new people that I was meeting, who didn't know what I was going through, but my old friends and family. They just couldn't relate to me. They were terrified of the subject of death. And so I was an outcast, and it took me many years to integrate those deaths and come to a place of peace and wholeness again. But it was such a struggle and a difficulty. When I got out of college, the first job I had was as a researcher for a possible documentary with PBS and on death and dying. So I was the researcher, and this was great because then this really helped me to heal, to learn about death, to find out what happens, to talk to death workers. And, at that time, the hospice was just about to become a thing because the AIDS epidemic was taking off. And so there were a lot of really amazing people that I met. We put together a proposal. It was fantastic. PBS even said, this is really interesting. But they said, it's still too taboo. We can't do this now. So, I had this career. And I worked in many different broadcasting situations and producing films and so on. And I got to the point in my career where I started my own production company, and we made some films. And then it was, what do you want to do next? And I'm talking to my business partner, and we're saying, oh, maybe we do this, maybe we do that. No, no, no. And he's pushing me, and he goes, I know there's something, you've got something. And I went, well, I've always wanted to do a film about end of life and what happens when you die. And he's like, that's what we should do. Let's do that. Still pitched it around. Nobody wanted to put money into it. They wanted a biopic of Michael Jackson. They did not want to talk about death. But I was going to make it anyway. And my business partner was really, really supportive. And while we were doing other shoots, wherever we went, so I'd have a crew with me, I'd say, who could I interview here? Who would be interesting? So as we traveled around, I was picking up interviews. So I picked up 18 interviews of amazing, remarkable people. And at a certain point, my business partner said, okay, do you think you have enough now? Do you think you could make something? I'm like, no, there's so many more people. We're not, there's, and he's like, no, we're making it now. And, as you go along and shoot ideas of what might be, who goes with who's talking to what, is formulating. So I had a pretty good idea. And when I sat down to really put it together, because again, this is the other aspect of this project, is nothing about it was done in a conventional way. And that was very intentional on my part, because, normally when you partner with a funder, they, especially in Canada, but it's true, absolutely true in the US too, that person is going to want to know, that organization is going to want to help shape what the story is.
Sure.
And I really didn't want to pre-script this film about end of life, because I knew for sure, especially as I started getting into the research, I had no idea. I had no idea the breadth and scope and depth of this whole thing called end of life and death and care, around that. I mean, it's just huge. So even with all the interviews that I had filmed, I realized I didn't have one film. I had 3 films. I couldn't put it all into one film. So that's how one film became 3. And it's also how I was fortunate to discover all the many questions I had no idea I had by talking to people and going, oh, well, if that's so, then what about this? And all the little doors that started to open. So that's the long answer of, why a film about death and why for so long. And I would say, even after making 3 films, there's more to learn and share about end of life. I just kind of stuck to some pretty basic stuff,
You just scratched the surface.
Yeah. And I think that my big goal going into it was never to tell people what to think. That's personal, but to give people something to talk about, to be timely and helpful and just enough provocative, and put it in a container that will carry you into the subject, because there's so much fear about death. So really, I would say that's the other priority of these films, is to make death more available to individuals to have conversations about, by demystifying a lot of things, and also to do it in a gentle and kind and inviting way. And people, really do say, I watched your film and I don't feel so afraid anymore about dying.
Well, isn't that the best thing for you to hear, right? It's as a documentarian, right?
Oh,
you
yeah.
you want people to be educated. So,
Yeah.
so I want to ask you about that first internship that you took when you got through with college. So that project basically went unfinished because PBS did not use it. For one thing, did you choose that particular project on purpose for yourself?
No. I was just hired as a researcher.
So it happened to be the project that they were using, that they were interested in.
Yeah.
Did you feel like somehow it was unfinished because it did not get pushed out?
Well, yeah, I think that's why it stuck with me all those years.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that also those events that happened to me really impacted a lot of the trajectory of my life in some ways. So there is that too, that strong desire. I never want other people to experience what I experienced. That is the power of a grief journey too, is that, when people are deep into grieving, there's a lot of energy there, and for me, it's not unusual for people in deep grief states to write books, start foundations, do all kinds of amazing good deeds because they just are in this place where they want to help other people because they hurt so much. Mm-hmm. And so I think for me, this is a product of my own grief journey for sure, just with delayed reaction.
Well, I mean, you were catapulted into a grief experience that some adults of advanced years don't ever have.
Oh, yeah.
But yours started when you were 19, and then 3 within a very short period of time, significant losses. And then at a stage in your life where your peers can't relate to you, your age peers, right? Your chronological
Mm-hmm.
peers can't relate
Mm-hmm.
to you.
Mm-hmm.
So what an amazing full circle for you to come back to with the films. On the website that you have, the When You Die website, it says, the last conversation you want to have shouldn't be the last one you do have. The last conversation you want to have shouldn't be the last one you do have.
Right.
So how do the movies focus on these conversations about death and dying?
Yeah, yeah. Starting with the first film, In the Realm of Death and Dreaming, it's kind of a gentle approach into the subject of death because it asks that question, well, what do you think happens after you die? Does consciousness continue? And I really wanted to start there because it's no one knows. There's no definitive answer, but there's a lot to explore in that question. And what you do personally believe helps a lot when you reach the end of your life.
Yes.
So, and it also helps guide you through what decisions you might make with personal directives and so on. So it's a big question that way. So that entree in opens the door. It allows a safe conversation. I mean, you could just have that conversation at Thanksgiving, like, hey, what do you think happens when you die? And people will talk about that. But if you over pass me the cranberry, I want to be cremated, that might not go over so well,
That's a terrible combination, but yeah, it communicates. That's absolutely true.
So that's sort of the way the trilogy begins. Although each one of these films are standalone, you don't have to watch them, and all 3 of them, and you don't have to watch them in order. But there is a logic to it. And then the second one is really around, how do you start the conversation? How do you, there's a lot of guidance there about just how you enter into this kind of a conversation and not to wait until, like we say on our website, don't let the last conversation you have to have. I mean, don't have the conversation when you're dying, right? When someone is dying, you don't want to ask them, so Mom, do you want to be buried next to Dad? Like, you just don't want to do that. You want to know those things up front. You want to know how they feel about, what level of medical intervention do you want based on your diagnosis? You want all those big questions straight up and clear, like, yes, I want to be an organ donor. No, I don't want to be an organ donor. All of those things. You don't want to have that when someone is sick. As much for the person who is sick and at the end of their life, as for you who loves them. You don't want to deal with this administrative stuff. You want to be there and support them. And so there's that aspect too of the films, of how to just be with someone, how to be at the bedside. You don't have to be anything special other than who you are, and just support them, And I know your work, you understand this so well with everything that hospice does for people, and how well they can support families who are awkward and they don't know what to do and they need guides, So this is just kind of a movie guide so that you can, with other people, talk about what's your experience. Have you ever sat with someone who was dying? What happened? Were you scared? All of those kinds of questions. And then, the third film, in some ways, I believe it's the most important in some ways, because it's really trying to look at how does the body break down. The third film, Architecture of Death, the inner world of dying, looks at how does the body die? How does it break down? What are the physical body symptoms? What are some of the emotions that are happening for the person who's dying? And also the family. There's a family constellation, and when a family member is dying, a piece of you are dying, because they are part of you. Our family is like really a psychic part of our being, and so part of us are dying. And we might start acting like to your brothers and sisters like you were back in junior high or something. You family relations definitely shift and change, so you should be aware of that. People should know that can happen. It helps. And then also, if the person who's dying is having experiences of deathbed visions, long lost relatives who they're talking to, and they having completely normal conversations, only they're the only one who can see them. Over 80% of people will have that experience. But really, up until very recently, it was universally thought, oh, you're just hallucinating. And then you're negating one of the most important experiences that the dying are going to have, because it's comforting most of the time. It's comforting to the person who's dying. So you don't want to say, oh, grandpa.
Yeah, he's been gone for 10 years. Yeah.
Yeah. Instead, you might try, what did he say?
Right. What wisdom is he there? I think there's a lot to be learned from deathbed visioning. I am loving this conversation, but we're going to take a break right now. There's more to come.
If you're looking for an easy solution to stay connected to your older loved ones, GrandPad is everything you need. It's the all-in-one tablet designed especially for seniors. With GrandPad, you get safe, simple video calling and photo sharing to connect the whole family. The GrandPad utilizes a simple format that allows seniors to enjoy games, music, email, and more. GrandPad comes with 4G LTE cellular service already included, so there's no need for Wi-Fi. Users can create a private family network that allows for secure photo and video sharing. At the core of the GrandPad team are the Grand Advisors, a group of seniors that continually inspire, test, and guide the development of GrandPad. The company has built a platform that empowers seniors of all ages and technological skills to safely connect with family, friends, and caregivers. No spam, no robocalls, only connections with those you trust. The GrandPad team strives to create a world where no senior is lonely or isolated. It's the smart choice to keep older adults connected. Visit our website today at grandpad.net/THOH or call 1-888-904-4723. GrandPad, keeping seniors connected.
So the experts that you have used in the documentaries, you've got a wide variety. You've got a big cast, I guess, for lack of a better word. Hospice Nurse Julie is one. She's an educational phenom these days with her videos on TikTok. William Peters, he's also been on the podcast to talk about shared death experiences, because there are a lot of different nuances to death and dying, and how we as, should I say, an audience, the people who are viewing the person who is dying and viewing that experience, there are a lot of nuances to that. Whether you're a family caregiver or a professional end-of-life worker. Why did you feel it was important to include all these different disciplines and experts? Because you've got nurses, you've got physicians. I believe there were some social workers worked in there. Why was it so important to include all these different folks?
Well, in deciding what kind of a film to make, like some people, there's some very, very, very beautiful films that follow one person through their dying process. I mean, they're magnificent and they're so helpful. But I was really curious about the people that have spent their careers at the bedside, and, or clinicians who were researching things like near-death experiences, or the question of consciousness, does it continue or not? And I wanted to really go to those people and ask them, what have you learned? What do you know? Talk to me. And I felt like that was just a whole sphere that most people don't see at all. That they just don't have. I mean, you might be able to watch Julie on TikTok, or and have these snippets. I mean, certainly a lot more is coming out right now about end of life, and it makes a lot of sense to me, because COVID changed everything, and all of these natural disasters that we're having, and all of these global wars that we're having, and right now we are really faced with death in a way that is unprecedented in the history of humankind, really. We have every manner of media that is screaming all of these things at us. So we're really interested. I mean, death has got our attention right now. And so a lot of very wonderful and skilled people are coming forward and available. But I still feel like some of those researchers wouldn't, my brothers would never find them. They wouldn't even know to ask. So that's why I wanted to really hear from a variety of people, from a variety of different perspectives. What do you know? What have you found out? Tell me.
Anybody who works in end-of-life care would tell you that we learn from patients and their personal wisdom, but I think we also acquire tacitly by observing the processes and the interactions. And each death is a little bit different, right? There are a lot of common things that people share across a death experience. But I think we learn as we collect these experiences. For instance, so I've been a hospice nurse almost 15 years, and until I got to know William Peters and looked at his work, I had never heard of anybody having a shared death experience. And I certainly hadn't experienced that for myself. And there may be a lot of hospice people that can't relate to that experience, but we certainly learn from the fact that he has had them and his research that he's doing. Just some very interesting work. And I love it that you included the different disciplines and the people doing different work, because hospice workers, end-of-life workers, are interdisciplinary, or transdisciplinary is the term that they're using these days. But because we each bring the gifts, the knowledge, the experience, everything that we are learned and have seen, we bring that to the care of the patients. And as a team, our care is made stronger and better and more comprehensive because we each bring that. So what an incredible learning tool for your documentary to have all these different disciplines. That's why I wanted to talk about that. So let's get a little personal, if that's okay. I mean, you've already shared a great deal of personal information, but I want to ask you, the content of the films, I mean, that's pretty heavy stuff. It's pretty heavy lifting. even for somebody who experienced death and grief at an early age, right? That's heavy lifting. How has the content of the films, listening to these people's stories and hearing their experiences, how has the content of the films changed you?
Yeah, well, I would say reverence for life. I have a not that I didn't before, but I think over and over again, in my own experiences with people who were dying, as well as especially with a lot of the people I talked to in the course of making this film, that love is so present. Now listen, we've got families that argue and all of these things, but on a whole, that there is a lot of deaths where love is so deeply present, and that families also can heal, or they could kill each other. I mean, I've personally been through both of those.
Right, right.
And I think that, recognizing the enormity of the passing of a human life, that this is extraordinary. I mean, babies coming into the world are extraordinary. It's first time I held my daughter, I mean, the minute she popped out and they put her on my stomach, it was like, you're fully there. Like I don't know what I thought, but she was a complete person already. She came right out fully there. And so on the other end of it, there's something really extraordinary about that. And that there is this love that is, it's not even like personal, it's more like this stream of love that can be there, and I know William can talk about it sometimes as these loving guides that help take you out, and
Right.
other people have spoken of it that way, and some of the things that can happen in the room are kind of amazing, light changing or smells in the room and things like that. But even with none of those things, there is this peacefulness that can happen, and I think that in talking to people over and over again, I think I've been struck with just the reverence of life itself, how important it is to really take a walk in the woods, to let nature be a guide in a way, because we have these seasons, and the seasons are like our greatest teacher. We personally go through 4 seasons as human beings, the spring all the way through to the winter, and then spring again. So I guess, for me, it's changed me in the sense that, I'm in awe of the whole human thing. And I also feel quite strongly that there's a lot more to being human than we give ourselves a chance to be, because we're so tied up in, got to go to work, after work I got to grab some stuff for dinner, get home, cook dinner, it's like our to-do list. We're constantly on this treadmill, but there's more to us than that, and we need to find little windows of ways to open it up so that there's more of humanity gets in, just even smelling a flower. Or I did a presentation a long time ago at the beginning of this film to the Mayo Clinic, where they do every 2 years a big arts and medicine kind of conference, and I was presenting my research. And one of the doctors there said that between patients he writes haikus.
Oh, that's awesome.
I thought that was so cool. I mean, it's just a moment, it's just a few lines, but he just shifted his brain, and so that he could be more present with the next person. Every person that he saw, he could shift his brain. And I feel like little things that we could do to sort of not be on our treadmill so much and to find breath. I think this is also why people are, practicing meditation more and more, because it's giving us the space, it's giving us that opening to be present and to ground. And then life is fuller. life is a lot fuller.
It's funny that you said that about the physician writing the haikus in between patients, because it helps him to be more present. So the Paris Olympics opened yesterday, and they had an interview with Steph Curry, who's a basketball player, basketball star, and he said, "Be where your feet are." He said, and that's what he was trying to do, because it was an overwhelming scene with all these athletes and all this world media coverage. And he said, be there, be present, be where your feet are. I think that's good advice, good life advice, good death advice. What was something that didn't get included in the films that you wished you had been able to put in, other than the additional interviews that your partner, your producer, wouldn't let you put in?
Well, I think I did. I put everything into each of the 3 films that I had to put in. I don't think, that's why, although I should say, I did a director's cut of the 3rd film, because there were things that were not in the 59-minute version that I felt really needed to be there. So, and this was an interesting conversation again with my business partner, because we finished the 59-minute version. I wanted all films to be under 60 minutes so they could be used in an educational setting. Mm-hmm. And then I said, okay, so now we got to go back in. He goes, we're done. I go, no. No, architecture is not done yet. And so it didn't take long, because I knew exactly what I wanted to put back in. But all that is to say, I feel very complete with those 3 films. Now, are there other films that could be made about end of life? Oh, yeah. There definitely are.
Is that a little bit of a sneak peek of things to come for you?
I don't know. I'm giving myself a complete year, so I've got 7 more months to think about it.
A little time to breathe there.
A little time to breathe. Yeah. So maybe, but there's just such a full, end of life is such a it's full of life kind of time, so there's so many angles that you could go into. And I suppose that understanding grief a little bit better would be the missing piece.
Well, and isn't that a huge conversation in 2024? If the pandemic didn't start us off learning about grief and grievers and how to grieve and how a lot of times we suck at it. Yeah, supporting each other. And of course, that's been a couple of years now, but we're still dealing with the effects of that. So yeah, I think there's a lot of conversation to be had around grief and bereavement.
Yeah, I think so too. And I do want to say though that I think that the trilogy, again, one of the foundational principles are if you understand what happens when we die, if you have a better handle and you're not as afraid, then you can enter grief in a healthier way. So I do think that's a theme, an unspoken theme of the 3 films, that's setting the ground for healthy grieving. But we didn't really say the G word, and there's a lot to say about the G word.
Yeah, I agree. So you guys have a podcast.
Yeah.
The When You Die podcast. What topics are you discussing on the podcast? What are listeners going to hear from you?
Oh, gosh. Well, we interview all sorts of people at the moment. A lot of people that you've probably interviewed as well. Even though Nurse Julie is in our films, I interviewed her as a podcast first and then said, hey, can I interview you for the film?
Right.
So there's that. We talk to death doulas. We talk to hospice nurses. We talk to people who help with end of life matters. We could talk to green burial people and funeral directors and people working with dementia specifically. And we talk to veterinarians who specialize in hospice and euthanasia for pets, for our beloved pets. Golly, it's a broad range right now, different people from all walks of life that are touched by grief. We have a really beautiful 2-part interview with Sherry Fitch, who's a children's author who's really well known for her Mabel Marple books. Anyway, and her son died, and she really carried us through the whole journey with her son in a very beautiful way. So some personal stories like that. We are planning to move more into different cultures and their approach to death and dying. So ritual in particular, some of that. So that we'll be looking forward to in the coming season, podcast season for us. And it's just the same. There's a lot of different types of things. It's a mishmash.
That's perfect. Okay, so Johanna, I want to ask you, when you've been talking with these folks and editing and cutting out what you don't want, you are engaging in a lot of content that is heavy, right? And you have your own history of grief events and loss. What do you struggle with when you've been having these conversations? What do you struggle with personally when it comes to focusing on death?
I struggle with grief, loss. Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking of my own family when death comes knocking at the door for me. It's not what I experience in terms of the conversations and the stories, and that I have a big capacity for, and people will say to me, wow, you've done all this work, on death and dying, you must be really good at it, and I'm like, no, when my family member or loved one, gets a diagnosis that they're dying, I'm a mess. Are you kidding? I cry. I mean, I might know how to navigate a little better than most people, and
Right.
that's really a gift, but you still go through the shock and the sadness and the grief and and carry it with you over a long time, so I think that all the things I've learned are very, very, very helpful, and they didn't knock me over. I mean, they really didn't. I do have a capacity for this kind of material, but when it comes to my own life, I'm no different than anyone else. You still have to feel it and cry and be with it, and if it happens to a friend, then how to support them, how to be there with them, that kind of thing. But it's not academic, it's just super real.
So do you think there's an expectation of people who work in end-of-life care, these so-called experts, right, in death and dying and grief and bereavement, do you think there's an expectation that they're going to do that experience better?
Yeah.
For themselves?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. When in reality, we're just a hot mess just like everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's absolutely true. Okay, Johanna, how can listeners find When You Die, listen to your podcast, and how can they watch the documentaries?
They can go to whenyoudie.org. And on our website, you can rent the first 2 films, In the Realm of Death and Dreaming and Saying Goodbye, Preparing for Death. And you can get information on upcoming streaming events for the 3rd film, Architecture of Death, The Inner World of Dying. You can also access our podcasts on our website, or every major platform also carries the When You Die podcast. And all those resources and links to our social media, they're all right there on our website. Or you could just Google us, When You Die.
Should be easy enough. We're going to have links in the show notes to all your social media and your platform, your website and the podcast. So, Johanna, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a great conversation, great projects that you're working on. Thank you for the work you're doing.
Oh, thank you, Helen. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I really love what you guys do too.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for listening to the Heart of Hospice podcast. Check out our sponsor in the show notes and please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. We would appreciate it if you would share this episode with your friends and family and anyone who needs to know more about hospice. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.